Thank you. Thank you so much. And hello to everyone. Actually, I'm going to put it on gallery because I want to see everybody, as many people as possible. And everybody looks very shiny. It's amazing we can see each other in these times. It's miraculous. So I thought that before we begin the program, I'd like to begin with a lineage supplication, a refuge prayer, and a wish for the wellness of all beings. And I know that people listening are probably coming from various traditions. It could even be that people don't have a particular lineage that they're involved in practicing, which is completely fine. So, what Julie and I were talking, and we thought, well, why don't I just write an aspiration or a supplication to the lineage, a refuge prayer for this particular program, and also a prayer on bodhicitta, which means awakening the heart and has to do with aspiring to benefit all beings. So this is what I wrote this morning for my lineage supplication. And it's very important for me to say these things before I teach so I can connect with the blessings of my lineage and the wisdom of the Buddha. So, as for the supplication, I supplicate to the lineage gurus and the liberating wisdom of the Buddha's teachings that in our exploration today, we don't drift from the authentic meaning of the Dharma, and yet have the courage to explore the teachings and question them and allow them to come alive in us through our conversation in a way that brings benefit for ourselves and others. That's my supplication. And I think my wish for all of you, but you can also make your own supplications to yourself, and I'm sure you have some very profound aspirations. So, as for the refuge, um, may we take refuge in our natural state of unconditional well being. So, however you understand that, unconditional well being, it could be a mind at ease or the compassionate kind of outlook for other beings or a sense of openness, whatever this means for you. I think we all know that most people say they experience, they have had experiences of unconditional well being. So, whatever that means for you, to take refuge, to recognize that there's a resting place for all of us. And then for bodhicitta, awakened heart or awakened mind, we want to extend this wish for both the temporal and unconditional well being of others. So let's just take a moment to let that sink in. So I'd like to begin first by thanking everyone at TLC. I'm so honored to be part of this project, their Transitional Life Care Program. And I also love the acronym that TLC stands for. It also means tender loving care. I think, and it helps me remember there's so many acronyms. How can you keep track, you know? So tender loving care, it's perfect. And I think TLC is doing such a valuable service for all of us. Julie sent me the video of Chagdud Khandro, and I can't imagine the benefit that must be having. It was so helpful to me, in fact. So, you know, TLC is inviting so many accomplished teachers and healthcare practitioners to speak about how to support others in their end of life process and also help us all prepare for our own transition when that time comes. So I'm so happy to be here. I'm honored to be a part of this amazing lineup, actually, of incredible teachers that have spoken at these programs. And I want to say, before we start, that I really do invite questions and comments, and please don't hesitate. Please send them to Julie, as she mentioned, because I think questions help open up a topic. It's like I can say some things, but we can digest them together, you know, and it gets more specific and more nuanced when we're able to address questions of other people. And of course, we all learn and benefit, including myself. I'm also here to learn about this topic, actually, because I feel like these topics, they're so deep and rich and they just keep opening. there's no end to that's how life is. It just keeps opening and opening. And can we bear it? That's the question, this continuous opening without shutting down around views or ideas. So I believe that the Venerable Gyaltsen Rinpoche was the mastermind behind TLC. And I want to say that many of you know this. Gyaltsen Rinpoche is my mother's root teacher, and also our family Lama, really. So in that way, of course, I didn't hesitate to say yes when Julie asked me if I'd come teach. Over the past couple of years, Rinpoche's shown so much kindness to my mother and to my brother and to me. Our mother, Naomi Mattis, has been in hospice for 2 years. She also has dementia, and he speaks to her over the internet, over Zoom, and he speaks to her with such kindness, encouraging her and reminding her to relax and saying mantras. And it's so beautiful because actually he's quite a bit older than she is. So there's these two elders spending time together at this stage of their life. And Rinpoche's always been so childlike. And so there's this kind of, but then at this time of life, he's even freer, more spontaneous, it seems like, than ever. And yet Rinpoche is thoroughly processed as a human being. It's so inspiring to see him speak to my mother. And my mother rarely speaks, but she's completely alert and aware when they're spending this time together and very clear about who he is. So it's a great gift to be able to have this connection. And it's interesting because it seems on a daily basis, people ask me, or my brother, I think too, how's your mom? And I can't say exactly how she sees the world right now. And yet I get a general sense that she's okay, that there's a sense of well-being around her, with her, in her. And many people assume that dementia is the most horrible fate, the worst thing that can happen. And I think in a certain way, in one way, this is just what I'm experiencing with her, that's an assumption. It's an interpretation of her state, which is just not limited to that idea. It's so much more nuanced than that. Sometimes we project our own fears and views onto people's processes in this kind of situation. And I think we often see aging as a pathology, Culturally, we see dementia as like you're doomed. And I guess in a way, of course, it's true that dementia could be called a pathology. And yet, I don't really look at it that way. I know my brother doesn't look at it in that way. It's just part of my mom's dissolution process. Some people have dementia and some people don't. Definitely the body is in its dissolution phase, kind of in this human form. And the persona is changing. But this is the way the chips have fallen for my mother, and it's karma. And I consider that karma is the dynamic activity of the nature itself, of cause and effect, is how things, how they arise, how they express themselves and then dissolve or disperse. So in a way, we can see, and this is true in the Buddhist path, this is a very important point, is that accepting karma itself is a liberation, to resist our karma is very painful. So karma, in a certain way, is apparent that things are arising and coming together due to a world of infinite contingencies. So there's this aspect of our being, we're not in total command. We don't know all the causes and conditions that have brought us to this moment in time, but it definitely molds and shapes the way we look at the world and how our body is and the environment that we live in. And we always only ever see a little piece of things. So, but I also think, at the same time, we have a lot of agency in this, strangely. Often we think of karma as like what we're doomed to experience or what we're lucky to experience, but actually we have a lot of agency in the way we relate to our life and interface whatever arises each moment, which is based on causes and conditions. And, just given the topic of this program, the theme, I just wanted to share a story from the sutras, and I think many of you have probably heard this story, but these stories always remind us, kind of set our mind straight, and remind us of how to approach our lives. So it's a story of the Buddha and the woman who came to him in great distress, and she was kind of clenching the body of her child in her arms, and she begged the Buddha to bring him back to life. And the Buddha said he would, but first she had to do something. She had to go to every household in the village where she lived and collect a single mustard seed from any household that hadn't known someone who had died. So she went to every household in her village. And when she came back, she was empty-handed. But when she came back, she was completely changed because she realized that death is something, it's a part of life. It kind of, maybe she knew that conceptually, but somehow, meeting all of those people who had encountered loss and so on, it changed her suffering from I am suffering to there is suffering. That's a very big shift. I am suffering, my own personal suffering, to the fact that this is the human condition. And so, then she was able to put down the body of her child and so forth. And I want to just point out that in a way, we could look at that as a liberation of sorts. That shift to I am, from I am to there is, and the recognition and the poignancy that, there is suffering and there is death. And this is a very, we might see this as a kind of, that we have to die as a weakness, but this power to embrace how things are is tremendously powerful. And we have the agency to do that. We have to see that we're not just doomed, but we have the agency of accepting how things arise for us. And we can value all experiences. So I have a very dear friend, and she lost her son when he was a teenager, and she always wears this locket around her neck, and it has a little mustard seed inside of the locket that reminds her of this story, because surely there was so much grief, so much grief. And of course, when we think of grief, there's not only pain, but there's memories and there's love and there's all manner of experiences. Grief is not a singular thing. Grief is a very poignant and natural experience. So although we have little control in certain ways in our lives, we have agency over the way we live our life and I think the way we die as well. So the two ways in which we have agency, I think, is to accept our karma, to kind of value everything that arises. That's the highest way we can accept our karma. And then to bring awareness to how we want to live with great deliberateness. Even the way we die, the way we live, to bring a lot of awareness to how we create that to happen. We have the agency to do that, how to work with our mind, and that's exactly what the path is for. How do we utilize the teachings to live our life in a way that brings our actions and our intentions together? A lot of times we don't observe cause and effect very carefully. And so, they say in the teachings, we know we have Buddhanature. How we know, the indication that we have it is that we all long for happiness. However, how we bring about happiness is often not in accord with our deepest aspirations. So we might long to be happy, but we're not doing what we need to do to create those circumstances to come about. But we do have the agency to do that. And I think, particularly if we have a path, if we have the Dharma instructions, to follow, to look deeply into cause and effect and make that happen. And even if we don't practice the Dharma, I think some people are really, we have a caretaker, actually one of my mom's caretakers, incredibly aware of how cause and effect works in her life. And she comes into the house and you can just feel it. She's paying attention to detail and she's looking so carefully at things and bringing about change. I feel we're very blessed to have this particular caretaker. She's been a great influence on me. I know I've learned so much from her. So I wanted to share, my mom's process with you. I guess partially because, I'm asked to teach this program, but I'm kind of in the thick of it. And then I lost my father 2.5 years ago. He was such an amazing, wild character, also close with the Gyaltsen Rinpoche, such a blessing. But it also doesn't escape me that I could die before my mom. And she's been in hospice 2 years. And everyone's so surprised. One of my friends said she's like an old juniper tree. She has so much life force, She doesn't speak. She hasn't stood up in 2 years. She can't use her hands because, the dementia, I think, because it's for some neurological reasons, it kind of pulls your muscles in. So her hands are pulled in. But her presence is there, and she's not at all like a couch potato. She doesn't really she's not that interested in watching TV. She's very aware of what's going on, and I thought I thought it would be good to talk about the dementia part of it with you in this program in the beginning, because Khandro Rinpoche also mentioned dementia in her teaching, and again I wonder. It's just a question, but it's been my experience that maybe we don't have to be so afraid of it, or we could look at it in a different way so that it's not so, we could see it as part of the progression of leaving the world. And I've found with just observing my mom, when the memory really starts to go is when it's hard, because you really have to let go. She really had to let go. And that was a really painful period. And then at some point, some relaxation came in, and she kind of, she was set free in a certain way by that. And I have to say, I've had some magical conversations with my mom since she had dementia, started getting dementia. About a year ago, when she was speaking a little bit more, once my mom loved to walk, and we used to walk. I love to move also. And we used to go for long walks together, and she couldn't walk anymore. And so we went on an imaginary walk together, and we prepared the whole thing. We decided, she said, let's bring red. Let's go on a walk with red. I have no idea what that meant. But I said, okay, Mom, let's bring red. And so I started taking out some red clothes, whatever, a shirt of hers that was red. And we went on that walk together just through our imagination. It was so beautiful. It was so touching. And the mind is so fluid and loose at that point. It's not tight and stuck in concepts. So I really enjoyed spending that time, these kinds of times with my mom. Magical times. And I don't want to romanticize it or anything, because there's been a lot of rough spots, and there's a lot of tedium in taking care of someone with dementia. It's 24/7, and there's a lot of challenges, and the bed sore thing is the worst part. Just trying to keep those bed sores, away. And we get fatigued, so there's all of that. But I'll tell you one more story. I wasn't going to tell this story, but it's coming to my mind. My grandmother also had dementia. Her mother had dementia. And I was very close with my grandmother. And we had a very magical moment together too. So my grandmother, when the dementia started to set in, she was very upset because she wanted to give me this gold necklace and she couldn't find it. She hid it, and now she couldn't find it. And time went on and her dementia got, increased a lot. And so then there was no chance of finding this gold necklace that she desperately wanted to give me this necklace. So one day when she was deeply, like when she was really in it, she was could hardly remember anything, let alone my name. I went to visit her and we're sitting on her bed together. And she always just remembered she loved me. she used to call me my beauty, my beauty. I was the first grandchild, we were very close. And we just held hands and we sat on the bed. We couldn't really converse in any way. And then all of a sudden, she snapped out of it. I don't know what happened. And we started to say, oh, I love you so much, and expressing our care. And then she remembered the necklace. And she said, I remember where it is. It was sewn into the hem of her bathrobe. So I went to get the bathrobe and I brought it to the bed and I opened it up. And it was so interesting because when she was immigrating into the United States, the way they kind of protected their property was to sew things into the hems of their clothes. And it was such a perfect like circle or something. Anyway, and then we were so happy. We had tears of joy. And then she went right back. She was gone again. It's very interesting. I don't know. I feel to say this because we don't know where we will go, but I feel like we're not doomed here. We're not doomed. This caretaker of ours, she always says, because we've had some rough moments, and then when someone's dying and a lot of people come together and family comes together, there's also dynamics you have to work with. And she always says, just stay open for the magic. In the roughest situations, there's always the potential for something surprising to happen. So, this notion that magic emerges from impossible situations is biology, and you kind of complain about having to take, these opportunities. These are all opportunities. It depends on how you look at it. Do you know what I mean? It depends on how you poise your mind in relationship to the situation that you're continuously encountering. So I just wanted to start with that. And I know that there's many of you there who know my mom. So I felt like this is a good way also to let you know how she's doing. Yeah, it's really nice for me, excuse me, to interact with you at this time and share this. So anyways, Julie asked me, I said, what topic should I teach on? And Julie said, what about faith in the dying process? And I thought, oh my God, what a great topic. Faith has been a very important topic for me in my life. We've done a lot of inquiry around that topic. It's a very curious topic, and culturally also, I think it's a challenging topic. And then bringing that into the dying process, which is, so pertinent for all of us. So I'm quite excited about this, to talk about this and explore this myself. But I want to start by saying that it's very humbling. It's a very humbling topic for me to speak about death. The reason is because, I have experiences around other people's aging process or my own aging process. In the past, I've lost a lot of people in my life, of course, as we all have. But I can't remember the last time I died. So I feel I can't really say with any kind of actually authority, what that's like in a certain way. It's really interesting to be asked to talk about that. And I haven't been asked to teach POA or give Bardo teachings. That hasn't been my area that my teachers have asked me to teach on. I'm very interested in Prajnaparamita, and the teachings on interdependence and emptiness has always been my focus of learning, and faith has a lot to do with that. But I do have incredible trust in the experiences of the great masters and the texts that describe what happens at death. And also, I do trust my direct experience of what it means to cling to a sense of existence and what happens when I stop clinging and rejecting around my own experience. In other words, I see that the harder I cling to existence, the more I fear my extinction. And this notion of existence is just the other side of fearing extinction. If there's nothing that exists intrinsically, then extinction, there's no need to talk about extinction. And this does have to do with Prajnaparamita. But anyways, we will explore what that means. So when I was thinking of dying in this notion of extinction and existence, I was remembering a long time ago reading Jamgon Kongtrul Lodro Tai, Jamgon Kongtrul the Great's biography. He was a great Tibetan scholar and poet and artist and physician and Tertun, like treasure revealer, Dharma treasure revealer, who lived in the 19th century. And he wrote in his biography, it was almost like a sweet complaint. I thought. So he was in retreat for a long time. And he was saying that when he was in retreat, his mind was so free and he was so unafraid of any kind of experience. He said anything could happen and I was ready for it. I wish that death would have come during that time while I was in that retreat. And then he said, I got pulled out of my retreat because I had to attend to all these worldly matters at my monastery. So he was just saying that he wished he could have died when his mind was so open, and not when his mind was so preoccupied. Now, whether I'm sure, knowing him, what I know of him, he would have been ready to die at any time. That's not the issue for me. What kind of came up for me was that this was a teaching for me. It impacted my mind because he was pointing to the fact that there are times when the mind is easier, it's free, at ease, and connected and less afraid. And there are times when the mind is contracted and shut down and tight and afraid, that most of our activity when it's shut down is how do I protect myself or how do I cherish myself? This is how we feel our ego, through trying to cherish and protect ourselves in this constant kind of way. So I'm assuming that you have an experience of being both free and being both shut down in that kind of way and being afraid. Even biologically, we're kind of programmed to protect and cherish ourselves as a means to survive. And then, of course, we have all kinds of preferences that we cling to. For example, when we sit down to practice, we wish we could just have a stream of illuminating experiences. But it so happens that when we sit down, many different kinds of experiences will arise. But we have a lot of preferences. We want to experience this, we don't want to experience that. And in doing so, we never really have a full experience. So that's when we drag our kind of ordinary mind into our practice. It's not a practice mind. The practice mind has much more curiosity and openness. And when there's curiosity and openness, of course, there's more grace. I like this term grace, actually. I want to say something actually about grace, maybe. So let's call this experience of feeling at ease with our world grace. So, when we're in healthy relationship to the world we encounter, we do experience a kind of grace, and we move in and out of confusion and grace, as I was saying. And this is just part of being a human being, I think. It's a part of being alive. And I think the word grace, in many ways, we're used to hearing that in religious contexts, which is great because there is some kind of exploration of grace or what that means or how that's experiencing in spiritual traditions. But I think we also can look at grace in terms of our ordinary experience. So, often we say, like, maybe someone is gracious when they invite us into our home. Well, let me just say, in terms of Julie introduction, in TLC's introduction, I came online and they've been very gracious, inviting me to teach and making sure that everything was okay, and making sure everything was clear what I was supposed to do, with a lovely introduction. So that's looking at how to make someone feel comfortable and allow them to do whatever they need to do. That's very gracious. I would consider that very gracious. We also talk about grace. We use the term graceful when someone isn't clumsy, when they could be physically graceful or graceful in the way they move about the world. Grace also is our ability to recognize something outside of us as being of value. We always say when we look at our teachers or the lineage, we might think that they bestow blessings upon us. But in fact, it's also our ability to recognize that something is of great value. So grace doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens through the nature of interdependence, mind and its world coming together in a particular way. That's grace. So, how we are able to poise our mind in relationship to our world brings about grace. We also know grace from just being incredibly awkward. Like, who am I? We think, who am I? That's kind of an awkward way. It's like we don't know who we are in relationship to things. We're going to talk about this later on. Kind of understanding who we are in relationship to the world we encounter is very important, and not being confused about that. But awkwardness comes from, like, we walk into a room and we don't know where to sit. I had a really amazing teaching from my teacher, Zigor Rinpoche. I was sitting next to him, and because we're married, I had a little throne with a brocade on it. I felt very uncomfortable sitting on the brocade, because I feel brocades are for lamas and stuff like that. Anyways, I was so awkward about it that everybody could see. And then I finally took the brocade off. But I was offered to sit there on that brocade, And so in Tibetan culture, where you sit is just very complex, It all depends on the situation. So he told me afterwards, he said, when you're giving, you should be able, when you're offered a seat, to accept that seat. For example, when I'm teaching, that sometimes I have to, I'm offered a brocade seat. That's to honor the Dharma, actually, not me. Actually, I was given that brocade because I'm Rinpoche's wife. Actually, to be perfectly honest, that's how it is. I'm honored as his wife. If we weren't married, then I would just be sitting somewhere else, right? So he said, if the situation requires that, then you sit on that. And if the situation requires that you express your humility or respect for someone, you sit on that. Like, there's no intrinsic truth to my importance. It all depends on the situation. But that's what awkwardness comes from. Not being quite clear about who you are. Who we are has to do with the context that we're in. I like thinking about grace and awkwardness. We all feel very graceful and we feel very awkward sometimes, and it's all okay because we're learning. When we're awkward, then we understand grace better. But this notion of grace really has to do with who we are in relationship to the world in which we live. So I want to say then that grace is not something that happens in a vacuum, but in relationship. And I want to introduce just a basic Buddhist principle that's going to keep coming up, because I tend to talk about interdependence all the time. And what we're talking about is mind in its world are interdependent. And the Buddha has talked about interdependence from the very beginning of his so-called career, or when he began to teach. And the first teaching he gave really was a teaching that came from a recognition he had at the dawn of his awakening. And it goes like this, and I'm sure many of you have heard it. He said, "This being, that becomes. From the arising of this, that arises. This not being, that becomes not. From the cessation of this, that ceases." I'll repeat that. There's so much blessing in it. And it's a very powerful instruction that will come up a lot today. So he said, this being, because this is, that becomes. So because of this, if these causes and conditions, then this can happen. From the arising of this, that arises. This not being, that becomes not. So if there are not causes and conditions to be there, the effect will not come, right? From the cessation of this, that ceases. And initially, these teachings were taken to teachings like the Four Noble Truths, for example, the suffering and its cause. If the causes of suffering are there, then suffering will arise. If the causes and conditions for suffering are not there, it will not arise. And then, of course, it will cease. So there'll be causes and conditions, perhaps, and that would be the path. So what we're talking about is causes and conditions and interdependence. So when we look deeply into this teaching, we come to understand that mind and its world arise together. And let me say one other thing about this teaching. It's a very, very important teaching. So he called this principle Pratityat Samutpada. That's a Sanskrit term, Pratityat Samutpada, which is often translated as dependent arising, or Joanna Macy uses the term mutual causality, which I like very much too, because it's talking about how the genesis of the world of appearances and possibilities doesn't come from a singular entity that creates everything. It's actually the nature of things being conditioned or interdependent is what makes everything move. And it makes everything, it pushes things into, and it seems to push everything into and out of existence. This is a very deep idea with very deep implications, and we'll get deeper into it as we go along. But so then also Thich Nhat Hanh described this principle as interbeing. So everything is. Everything is interconnected. You can't find anything that's singular, meaning singular or whole. For example, I often use the body as an example, that the body is made of all these different interdependent parts that are trying to find balance in the field of gravity. If it was one solid whole thing, it couldn't move. It would be inert. But the fact that there's parts is what makes us able to move around and change and so forth. So this means that the body or anything else, that as long as it has sides, as long as we can point to it and say there's a thing, that it is not singular or whole. It's made of parts. And this is true for consciousness too. We might have an idea, but that idea is not like one solid thing. It would just be inert. It wouldn't go anywhere. You know, all of our mind, if we look at the nature of our thoughts and emotions, is made of parts. And therefore, it's changing all the time. And when you sit and practice, you see how much it's changing. It's almost so wild, you know. It can be, or it can be very clear and calm. But it's not a singular thing. A thought or a moment is not like some kind of static, inert thing. So when we're looking at the nature of interdependence, we also see then that things are impermanent, or they're changing all the time, because everything is leaning. This is also, you know, when the Buddha talked about interdependence, he described, there's kind of an illustration in the sutras talking about two bundles of reeds leaning up against each other. So it kind of makes this shape. Everything leans. So because this one can stand only because it's leaning against this one. And when this one falls, of course, this one's going to fall too. So I often talk about interdependence as everything is leaning, everything leans. So everything is moving and changing. Nothing is permanent because everything is leaning. So beautiful. Then the third one, so things are not singular or whole. They're not permanent. They're always changing. And the third has to do with that there's nothing that exists outside of the nature of interdependence. So, I've often challenged myself in my studies to try to think of something that existed outside the nature of interdependence. And of course, you would never know it, because in knowing something, it means you're in relationship to it. So mind and its world, they always arise together. The awareness or the clarity of our mind is always in relationship to known, what is known, an object. So this is sometimes hard for people to grasp at first, but let me give you an example. A mirror, we often think, we use that analogy for the mind, right? For many reasons. So, often we think, well, a mirror, it always stays the same, but it's the images in front of it that change. But in fact, a mirror is a mirror by virtue of the fact that it reflects images. So when something comes in front of it, it's reflected in the mirror. So in other words, the mirror is like the mind, and the images are like the object, but the objects are reflected in the mirror, and the mirror reflects the objects. And mind is something like that. It's very important. This is a very important point, because what it means is the way our mind is kind of influences the way we see the world, and the world influences us. So what we call experience is this kind of playful exchange of our what we call our inner and outer worlds. Our outer world can also be our thoughts and emotions, because our mind is aware of how we feel or what we think. So even though it's kind of, like, we think of outer as outside the boundaries of our body, that's not really what it means. It means that there's an object of our awareness. Something comes before our awareness, and you cannot say they're one, and you cannot say they're two. So I want to do a little practice with you, just a really short practice on this one. So the renowned 2nd century master who taught the Prajnaparamita sutras, or taught on interdependence quite extensively, named Nagarjuna, a great hero of mine for sure, talked about the relationship between subject and object, saying, subject and object are not the same, nor are they separate. They are not one, and they are not two. So the reason, again, I want to talk about this is because the way we see the world will determine what we see. But it's not like saying there's no world out there. Things are happening. Things are happening. It's just that there's not a separation between inner and outer. This is a very deep Buddhist principle. So interdependence is a reconciliation of dualistic thinking. There's the inner, there's the me, and then there's the outer. And sometimes the outer seems like, life is something that's happening to us. And then there's a sense of losing agency. So it's very important that we're clear on this. So I just want to ask you a few questions, and then I'll give you an example, so that I really don't want this to be abstract in any way. So I just want to ask you to look at your mind and your experience. So I have a little gong here, and I'm just going to ring the gong, and and I'm going to ask you a few questions, and then I'll ring it to stop, and just want to give you a chance to also digest. So we can begin by just sitting in a comfortable position, and let's just do a couple deep breaths, deep, healthy breaths beforehand, and I'll guide you in that. And you can keep your eyes open or closed or however you want. So let's take 5 deep, healthy breaths, and when you breathe in, just allow your whole body and mind to expand, and with a long out breath. And you can put your hands on your fingers so you can press a finger into your knee each time you take a breath. That helps focus. And let's just do 5. So the first question is, can you locate where your knowing mind ends and the world begins? Can you locate where your knowing mind ends and the world begins? Don't ask this question to your intellect, but more your direct perceiving of what you're experiencing. So the next question is similar. Can you separate your mind from the world it perceives? The world it perceives is just this momentary experience as it arises. Can you separate your mind from the world it perceives? And the third question would be, would you say that the way you look at the world influences the way you see things? Would you say that the way you look at the world influences the way you see things? And the last question is, would you say that the world influences your mind? Does, does the world influence your mind? The way, would you say that the world influences your mind? So now let's bring our mind back to our breath. Let's do 5 more deep breaths. So now I'd like to tell you a story because it's a story about kind of coming in and out of grace, or actually out of grace and then into grace. But how quickly that can change your experience, your whole world. Um, it's a story about my mom, actually. It's more about me, but my mom is a interesting part of the story. It's good that I thought I'd choose this one because my mom seems to be a theme for me today. So um, it's also about refuge, faith and refuge too. So maybe two and a half years ago, before my mom was in a place where she couldn't walk or function in an ordinary way, she had the wherewithal to want to pack up things that she didn't need and take them to a consignment shop, which I thought was very. She is a person who, in that way, really paid attention to cause and effect. She was ready to give up some things. And she was moving very slow at that point. And so we spent a long time going through all her clothes and deciding which ones she wanted to keep. Mom never liked to have a lot of things. She's not a very cluttery house. It's very a little bit Zen-like, I guess, very tidy. So we packed up her stuff in boxes. We had quite a few boxes. Um, and we had a plan to go see the eye doctor. We live in a kind of a remote area, so we have to travel an hour to see any kind of doctor or go to a small town even. So I made an appointment with the eye doctor. Um, and we went to the town and we thought, okay, I'll take her to the consignment shop first. So we went in. Um, and we brought in the boxes, and I thought we were just dropping off the boxes. I thought we'll make it to the appointment on time. I had this pressure, and of course, even to get out of the car, it took a long time. I was getting a little impatient. We finally got in there. We dropped off the boxes, but no, she wouldn't leave. We had to open the boxes, and she had to show the lady there everything. So she started pulling stuff out of the boxes. She pulled out, a bag and a pair of pants and I don't know, a shirt, and like had to tell the story behind each thing. So because I was in charge there, I was getting more and more uptight about it because I was worried about time. And I just kind of wasn't uh, able to relax. Let's put it that way. And so she was pulling out all these things, and then it was taking like 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and then finally she pulls out this dress, this long dress, like in the 70s, the dress go down to your ankles. I think it was 70s. And I remembered that dress actually, and it was very chic at the time, in that time, but it was kind of like patchworky, and I remember it very vividly. And what she said and what I remembered is my mom wore that dress to the Grammys because my dad was in the music business, and he took her to the Grammys that year, and that's the dress she wore. And they were just like this chic little couple, I remember. And anyways, suddenly, when that happened, it evoked so many memories for me, and my mind kind of stopped. And I remembered all the things that happened, and I realized, there's such a shift, and my heart began to open and expand. And I didn't feel restricted by the time, but I was able to bear the poignancy of the moment. And I realized in that moment, there's so many memories, and there was love and family, and then the truth of the human condition, that my mom was letting go of that part of her life, that stage of her life. She had let go of my father. There was old age and death, there was loneliness, grief, uh, comfort and discomfort, and just the brilliance of being alive. Like there's so many things kind of arose in my experience, and it was so timeless. Um, and all of a sudden, I didn't feel constricted by time, but kind of shifted out of this very puny world I was living in. Um, and it was so interesting because we were still in this musty little dark shop. It was very kind of, I don't know, cave-like, that shop. But in that moment, everything shifted there, and it became, I felt that sense of grace, and the world itself seemed so rich and so poignant and so beautiful. Um, that's how, because mind and its world are connected, we move in and out of these places. And I want to say this because I think sometimes we feel maybe grace is not something we have, or we can't connect with, or, it's something we can't access. But in fact, it's very much a part of our experience to move in and out of it. And it's very important to recognize that. And in a way, death, we have so much chance for that to happen at the moment of death. And particularly if we honor and value these experiences. I also value the experience. I wanted to get my mom there on time and so forth. But it's good to see both of these experiences because we know we move in and out of these things. So it just was important for me to, I think it's important to recognize that we have these experiences and understand that when we have these experiences, that we need to have confidence, faith in those experiences. Not double, how do you say, overthink it or doubt it. When we have a direct experience that's powerful like that, we don't have to say that wasn't a genuine experience, because actually the truth is I had to get my mom to somewhere on time. You know, that's a truth too, actually. I had to get in the context of time, the truth of the context of time, that's true. But in a bigger sense, there was an opening. And that's where the love comes. And we need to trust that this is a resting place for us. We need to trust this is a refuge for us. Um, so to recognize and to trust our direct experience, and then to do our spiritual practice, which is, we say meditation. The word for meditation in Tibetan is gom. It means to familiarize ourselves with, or habituate ourselves to, these bigger experiences. And then we look at the great masters and we see, oh, they have unconditional faith. They have an unconditional resting place. They don't waver. They don't leave that resting place because it's like their default. And then somehow, just by virtue of being human, we default also to our resting place, to this really true, authentic place of being, So this is something to really trust, not to second guess the poignancy and the purity of that experience. So this is not to say cling to it, but this is just to deeply value and recognize it. And in the end, I think we need to value all it. We value all of our experiences is a way to learn. But the funny thing about this story too is, despite all of this kind of so-called sidetracking that happened, we did make it to the appointment on time. Very magic. Like I'm saying, this is the magic that comes to. It's not really magic. Maybe it's just life when we're not in the way of it, life when we're not grasping and rejecting, because there's so much more possibility and creativity and grace that can happen when we don't, even in difficult situations, So anyways, that's the story. And I just use that as an example of how mind and its world, we can't separate. The way we see the world will determine what we see, and what we see will also influence our own awareness. So I want to get back to something I said about Jamgon Kongtrul, and the questions that arose for me, because I started to see that the harder I cling to existence, the more I feared extinction. Sorry. So existence and extinction come together in that way, through the nature of interdependence, right? So, in the teachings, in the very traditional, especially in the Mahayana teachings, but also throughout the path, if you study in the Tibetan tradition, then you study the three yanas or the nine yanas. So the path is very gradual and has different steps to it. But each tradition has its own integrity around the nature of dependent arising. Um, we talk about going beyond or transcending the dualism, transcending the extremes of dualism, the extremes of is and is not, or existence and extinction. Um, when we read the Heart Sutra, we hear Om Gate Gate Padagate Padagate Bodhiswaha, gone, gone, gone beyond, gone completely beyond. What are we going beyond is dualism, clinging to existence and fearing extinction, holding on to beliefs and then falling into doubt when our beliefs don't hold up, hoping that things will happen the way we want them to, but with this constant fear that we're going to, things aren't going to go the way we want them to. And this is a big part of understanding, I think, how to live our life and how to understand our death. At least it is for me on a continuing basis. And I was thinking about this some days ago, how this might be an interesting exercise for all of you to try to contemplate, recall the earliest memory you have of learning about death. Like for me, I remember exactly when I heard the word death for the first time. I was at my neighbor's house, and she said something about dying, death or dying, and I said, "What is that?" And she says, "Shh." I said, "What is death?" And she said, "Shh, don't say that loud because I don't want my little brother to hear it." So there's some kind of like scariness around this word. And then, I asked my mom and my dad, and, I started to kind of wake up to this notion of extinction, And then my inquiry continued as I began to learn about the Cold War, which was happening, at that time in my life, and that, there's a nuclear bomb that's aimed at our country, and when we're at school, we have these little individual desks, and every now and then, I don't know if you remember this, it was so ridiculous. They used to say, "Drop," and then you have to drop onto your desk, is because it's going to save you from a nuclear bomb. So we had to drop. It's just kind of traumatizing thing to do to a child, actually, without any kind of understanding that we just drop under our desk in that kind of, like, you're not expecting it, and then the teacher just alarms you, and then the alarm goes off and you practice, what might happen if you get struck by this nuclear bomb. So, this kind of, I remember this existential angst kind of beginning to rise in my being. And I remember very distinctly sitting on the steps of our porch, our house porch. I remember everything, the color of the porch and what I was, and this kind of foreboding sense of doom that I was feeling at that time. And it seems like when you're a child, you're trying to make sense of the world, Nowadays, due to the internet, I think the young children are really scared about climate change that they learn in school. And it instills so much fear in children. A friend of mine told me that her daughter is constantly afraid that the ground won't hold her up anymore, that the ground is going to break apart and she's going to fall in. And I wonder if it isn't a very good question that we should all be asking, how to support our children to live with this notion of, climate change or death, just death in general, with this conundrum we have and all the kind of messaging that the kids are getting. And I wanted to suggest that maybe TLC should ask an expert who works with children to kind of engage this topic, because I think it could be very helpful for parents and children both. I remember I had a teacher who said that if you can explain something to a child, then it means you really know it. If you can explain it simply, it means you really know it. So I just want to put that out there. I do think kids, and also with the COVID thing and the masks and there's so much alarming messaging going on. I get worried about that with children. Um, I get worried about that for all of us adults too. But I think for the children, they're trying to figure something out. And I just remember this having to drop under my desk and how scary that was. So it made me think of like how difficult this time must be for children. Anyways, the notion of is and is not, and existence and non-existent, existence and non-existence or extinction is really deeply, fundamentally addressed by the Buddha, very deeply. And it's something to examine. But I want to put something out there, and then maybe we'll open it up to discussion. So please feel free, to write anything into the chat, or consider if you have any questions or anything to share stories. But the Buddha said something very, very profound, and we'll address it more in the afternoon, about existence and non-existence, or existence and extinction, which actually the Buddha often refers to as eternalism and nihilism. These are philosophical terms. But how philosophical terms are expressed again is, clinging to existence, fear of extinction, belief and doubt, clinging to meaning and fear of meaninglessness, hope and fear. These are expressions of eternalism and nihilism. So I'd like to look at those a little bit more in the afternoon, to these extremes, and then what it means to go beyond extremes and understand who we really are, rather than being existent or non-existent. So the Buddha said this in the sutras, and this is my favorite quote, and I rarely give a teaching without this particular quote. The Buddha said that things exist is one extreme, that they do not exist is another. But I, the Tathagata, accept neither is or is not, and I declare the truth from the middle position. So let me say one more time. That things exist is one extreme, that they do not is another. But I, the Tathagata, accept neither is nor is not, and I declare the truth from the middle position. So this is a declaration of great confidence, unconditional confidence. And we need to talk about what unconditional confidence is in this tradition, because unconditional confidence is what I would call unconditional faith. Faith beyond just belief and doubt. When I say belief, I mean clinging to ideas desperately, because we want to find some ground, and then getting disappointed from the world when our beliefs don't hold up. It could be our belief in the institution of marriage, or, we might look at our dharma, and look at, be disappointed by someone in our community, or whatever it might be. The more we cling to belief, the more doubt is just right around the corner. So there is another way to be that's not so fragile. And so we'll talk about this, but this is a lion's roar, this quote. It's coming from a place of deep confidence, unconditional confidence. Unconditional means that it's not affected by belief or doubt, that it's not clinging to one thing only to kind of fall down into the other thing. Extremes. It's beyond extremes. It's Om Gate Gate Pada Gate Pada Samgate Bodhisvaha. Gone, gone, gone beyond, gone completely beyond. It's not going beyond the world as we know it. And a lot of people don't like the term transcendence, which is what this means, going beyond or transcending. It's not transcending the world in which we live. We need to be in the world in which we live. We need to respond to the world in which we live. But we need to get beyond our dualism. are clinging, the way we see things. Because mind and its world are not the same, nor are they different. And there's some place of confidence in this understanding. So I've spoken, I don't usually speak for this long of a time at once without doing something. So let's open it up for some conversation. And then if we have time, we'll do a short meditation, and then we'll take our break.
There are questions here. Well, one
great.
question and one comment.
Okay.
The question is, can you explain more by what you mean there is not two?
Yeah, not two means not two separate things. So when we're talking about if there's two separate things, we have like a belief here and a doubt there. But what we're trying to do is reconcile or find a different way of looking at something that goes beyond those extremes. So, we've just talked about how holding on to beliefs, we can fall into doubt. But when things are like this, we find something altogether different. So when we say like mind and its world, we are two separate things. Actually, we couldn't separate mind from the world it encounters. So this is actually, just to use a mudra, I don't know, it's not an official mudra, but I like to use this mudra, is that this is the actual status of things, that everything is interdependent. There's nothing that exists in and of itself. Everything is leaning. Also, this will become a little bit more clear in the afternoon when we do this. We're going to do a investigation together into the nature of things, and it's going to show us what that means, that everything, there's nothing that exists in a vacuum. Everything comes into being through causes and conditions. So we can't say there are two. It's leaning. My teacher once, one of the first teachings I got from Dzigor Kongtrul Rinpoche, my main teacher, was he said to me, Lizzie, is this one or two? And he made this shape. This is why this shape is so important to me, because I got my first kind of teaching on this from him at a very special moment when we were in Asia. And I said, well, it's not one thing, because it's made of two parts, but it's not two things, because it makes this one shape. So it's not one and it's not two. And I think mind in its world is a very good way to talk about it. You can't know anything if the mind is separate and in isolation from its world. If the mind existed in and of itself, it would be inert. It wouldn't know anything. And vice versa, what could be known? If there's nothing outside to be known, then the mind would have no knowing to it. And so, a mirror is also a very good example. But what we're talking about is also the unity of things. When we talk about union, union is always one or more things brought together, but it doesn't mean they're one either, right? It's a little bit like water and ice. But we'll move more in that direction of explaining this in the afternoon when we do our investigation. It's very profound. But, to understand the Dharma, especially to understand the idea of emptiness, we say, when we're talking about clinging to existence and fearing non-existence, we have a sense that there's really a solid singular self there. That needs to be examined. And the way that's examined is through looking through the nature of interdependence, through the wisdom of interdependence that the Buddha introduced, which is why I'm bringing it up here.
Okay, and then another is, there was a comment, and it just is the point of magic, the Vidyadhara's use of the term ordinary magic.
Yeah.
I think there was a request that you comment on that. And then there's another question as well.
Yeah, so I think the Vidyadhara refers to Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, who used that term. Um, yeah, because it's the natural way of things. So we might say, I mean, I can't assume to know exactly what he meant, and there's many teachings on this, so of course you can study. But my understanding of this is that it's ordinary, not because um, it has to do with the way things actually are. We think it's magic because we live in a very dull, coarse world a lot of the time. So this seems really magic. I think that's one of the reasons, or what I would say about it. But it's also like we don't want to grasp onto that as something special and then think that the rest of the world is mundane, because actually everything is magical. And that's why I liked this story, or I presented this story to show that it was a shift in the way I was looking at things that changed what I saw. It wasn't that there are some things that are ordinary and some things that are sacred. That would be a very dualistic way of looking at things. But in fact, in my mother's situation, I found, we find magic in her caretaking in difficult situations, in challenges. Sometimes that's where most of the magic actually comes, because it pushes us out of something, you know. So, what is ordinary maybe is what is natural to us, uncontrived, you know uncreated, but just really seeing things in a very fresh way without a lot of grasping and rejection. Whereas, grasping and rejection is often based on exaggeration and denial, two other extremes. Like we impute our own notion of what something is, and we don't really give ourselves a chance to see what it is. When we see what it is, we might see something very different. Like that dark, musty room could be seen as something very different.
Could you speak some about very simple and basic ways of dying with faith?
Mm. Yeah, well, having not remembered dying, I can't speak from, that. I find it so interesting to be asked that question. It's very humbling to me. Um, but this is what I can only assume through my own inference. Okay. Inference means I'm having some other experiences while being alive. And I assume, not even assume, I have a lot of confidence. And the confidence comes from the nature of seeing that things are interdependent. So I have never been able to find something that exists outside the nature of interdependence. And believe me, I have really looked. I've been studying this for like 35 years. It's been like it haunted me, and I'm obsessed with this wisdom of the Buddha. And I have never seen. I know that something cannot arise out of nothing. Okay, if there are no causes and conditions, something cannot arise. So when we think of coming into existence, I don't think we could come into existence from non-existence. So this is just part of it. So and then I have and this is very traditional contemplation. Everything I'm saying, actually, these are very traditional in the middle way or Mahayana. I'm speaking very much from a Mahayana point of view, although the view is the view even in the Vajrayana. So it goes all the way through. But I also see that when I look into my own experiences, no matter what the quality or nature, they all arise, express themselves, and dissolve or disperse because of the nature of interdependence, because that is their nature. And so I have faith in that. So I bring that kind of confidence. So that teaches us how to interface our experiences. Phenomena is phenomena, no matter whether it's scary or pleasing or not pleasing, whether it's blissful, what have you. So I'll tell you a story. I'll tell you a story here. So, once I was in this a long retreat, quite long, and I don't know, the second or third year, I did a no, I don't remember, maybe in the beginning, I was doing a sadhana practice. And so, you know, it's interesting to be in retreat. Many of you probably have done retreat, but sometimes when you first go in, you just want to have a little bit of experience, not a lot. Not a lot. You just want 10%. That's the comfortable part. Maybe as you go along, you can allow in 20%, or maybe there are times where you feel maybe like how Jamgon Kongtrul felt, bring it on because you feel so open to any kind of experience because the grasping and rejection is a little bit decreased from your practice. So you're very open. But anyways, I was in this, at a point in my retreat, I was doing a practice of Guru Rinpoche, Padmasambhava, a great master. And anyways, I was to connect with this one wisdom holder. And it's a particular kind of practice. And I was just feeling like disconnected, completely like my whole heart was like a dry seed. In my mind, I so wanted to connect with the practice or connect with my own nature, which is really what you're trying to do. I wanted to connect, but it was very dark and it was very dry. And each day went on, and I felt I couldn't feel the warmth of my own mind at all. This went on for quite a long time. And in a certain way, I had so much longing, but this is what was arising for me. This very dark, I could say it was kind of a depression or just a kind of sadness of not being able to connect. So finally I went to talk to my teacher, Kongtrul Rinpoche, and I said, I'm not connecting with the deity. I can't see the face of the deity, which is a way of saying I can't connect. And he said that is the face of the deity. That is the face of the deity. And that switched everything for me because I saw I have so many preferences of what I want to experience. And I have, I think that the magical part is over here, the guru, and this is what he or she should look like. And then on the other hand, I have, just this darkness, which is what is actually happening. And it was interesting because during that time, my friend sent me up a book about Mother Teresa, not knowing what was going on. And she was going through this period where she was encountering the dark night of the soul, kind of how they talk in Catholicism, where she was really doubting a lot of things in her practice. And maybe what I was having was doubt too, not quite, because I was more self-doubt in a certain way. And she said something like, I can't see the face of God. And what I came to understand when I received my teacher's instruction is that, when you look, the guru, it's like I made him a thing, made it a thing. But actually, what the nature of all the phenomena is not a thing that is singular or permanent or outside the nature of dependent arising. And when I was able to value or not have aggression to this natural vitality of my own mind, I was just completely opened up. So we have these preferences about our experiences. We reify, what's called reify. We make real, solid our experiences. The whole point of this is to look and see the nuance of our experience rather than shutting down. Like we tend to put a lid on things. We don't allow ourselves to have a full experience. So it was my bracing against my experience that didn't allow me to have a full experience of what it was. So it's this subtle shift in my approach. So I always think, what do I want to bring to my death? This is my thinking in this way. I know this is a long-winded response, but when you take everything as your teacher, when you value everything, you can't go wrong. You apply it as your practice to it, you apply the view to it, Because what are we really afraid of? There can only be two things around death that we're afraid of. One is that complete extinction, which, because I see that something can't arise from nothing, and because of the nature of interdependence, causes and conditions, that I've never experienced this is the world of appearance and possibilities come from that. There is no end to that. This is the natural arising of things. So I'm not really worried about extinction, but you could be worried about having some really frightening experiences, or not, getting overwhelmed and bewildered by your own mind. But when you find confidence in the fact that things are not as they appear, when you see that everything is not solid or singular, not permanent, and not existent, you're not doomed. You're not doomed. And there's this liberating quality to it. This will, I think, become more clear in the afternoon. But what I'm saying is that, if we train ourselves now to appreciate, to see some value in everything, at least as a learning experience, that will carry over, that will habituate our mind. And I think it's a very, very powerful choice that we have. It's a choice. We have agency to direct our mind in that way. So, anyways, I think these are good questions. I think that they will be addressed a little bit more in the exercise that we do. Yeah, in the second half.
In what extent should we do specific practices to prepare for death? Or would the view and the practice of Prajnaparamita be enough to prepare for death?
Yeah, well, Prajnaparamita is part of a bigger body of teachings on the way of the Bodhisattva, really. The whole Mahayana has an entire path to it. So it's the wisdom aspect. But we also have, with the wisdom aspect, the practice of bodhicitta and stepping outside of a contracted sense of self that involves cherishing and protecting the self, which is how we experience ourself, how we actually establish what we consider to be the self, stepping outside of that in service of others. And that, I can't imagine a better path than the path of committing oneself to service to all beings as a way to move away from the sense of existence and extinction. Existence is something I think that when we look deeply into it, we can't really find a self that's singular, permanent, or independent. And yet, this is more of an experience. When you're serving others, there's this kind of freedom and feeling a part of the great nature of interdependence, And when we contract into ourselves, we feel really doomed and afraid. And I think if we train ourselves to in the service of others, but also in the training of emptiness, and looking at extremes, and this is kind of part of what we'll introduce in the afternoon. I think what could be better than that? I'm a very strong proponent of the Mahayana path of the Bodhisattva, and that's mostly what I teach. Although in the Vajrayana, there's very powerful, skillful means. And they're very direct, and they say that it's faster. It's a more powerful, skillful means. But I do think, Prajnaparamita also is part of that view. But I think, Dharma practice, the whole purpose is to work with mind in relationship to its world, which is what we have to take into our passing, So I have, such great confidence in these teachings because I've been able to see, I've studied a lot of Madhyamaka logic, and logic is not just about, putting things together conceptually, but also recognizing how things work and how to be in accord with that. So, we have tremendous agency to prepare for this based on the observation of cause and effect, understanding what our resting place is, so we can say we're resting in the nature of emptiness, or connecting with a compassionate mind, you know, um, devotion, awe, all of these. You might say that Prajnaparamita is the ability of mind to rest in awe, or to rest without grasping and rejection. This is what Prajnaparamita is, the mind that is able to bear emptiness, or the mind that is poised to see the nature of things without impediment. That's what Prajnaparamita is. So I do think that this is a path. I don't know. I can't say, could never say that you could improve that. Personally.
I have early onset dementia. I find that my identity is unraveling. This is fascinating, but also troubling.
Yeah.
All my practices and understanding of the Dharma are falling away. I'm concerned that my transition will be filled with fear and grasping. What do you suggest?
Thank you, for sharing that. And it sounds like you're at the place that's the hard place, that I saw in my mother as well, because she was so intelligent, and it was hard for her to lose that same kind of sharpness and memory. But I really, this is just my experience, and I can't say for sure, but what it seems to me is there's a kind of freedom I see in my mom now that she didn't have before. It's kind of it's almost like the shell breaks and it expands out. And we were able, to this is why when people have dementia, I think when they say, let's go on a walk with Red, you don't say, Mom, what do you mean by that? You don't say, what do you mean red? What's red? Or you join in that incredibly beautiful, expansive conversation that's not really hindered by convention. And, I've met a lot of lamas that mind seems like that to me. Really, like, sometimes could be a bit wild or unconventional or expanded in that kind of way, not kind of limited by what we think should be said or the logic as we see it. And it looks very free to me. I sometimes think, oh, that looks really nice to be like that. So while you're here, make some prayers, just for the mind to be like free in that way. And just say as many mantras as you can, and tell people to put mantras, in your environment. So my brother made a mantra tape because he's a musician for my mom. And then, and I mean, I feel, again, very humbled to be talking to you, because you're going through a process that on a certain level, I haven't gone through that, I mean, but I think maybe there's more to it, than just kind of the thinking mind. Maybe all the things that you've done in your life, has led you to being able to relax in that way. And I don't know, I know there's a lot of things said about the dying process, but I do feel, I've been around somehow a lot of people who have died, or with people who have died, and I've seen so much grace happen. I've seen so much. It doesn't seem like an ordinary experience to me. So, this is just my experience of this, and I wish you the very, very best. And we all just don't even know what's going to happen to us. It's a very interesting piece of being a human being, but just to try to rest at ease, and also understand, I just say, please understand that this beginning part of dementia seems to be the hardest part. And that's what the caretakers have told me. And also I've seen other accomplished lamas who have had dementia. So it's okay. It's just part of your unfolding. Yeah.
As we near death, or sooner, as in your dear mother's case, we tend to lose mental clarity from the insights we have had, like about our non-dualism, non-two, for instance.
Yeah.
What if we are in an accident and die suddenly? Where is our practice then?
Yeah.
Or as we lose consciousness as we die, how do we have faith that our practice carries us?
Well, this is why I think we're practicing now. And I do think this is why mantra practice is such a big deal, like in the Tibetan community. I see the elders in the Tibetan community doing tons of mantras, not because, oh, if you say 100,000, you're going to get this or get that, but to kind of rest your mind and associate it with very simple sounds so that when you're, in a place where you feel afraid or not sure what's happening, you just recall the sound and the feeling of openness comes. And I was telling some friends, I don't remember when it was, so recently, I take a big mala to bed with me because, like, I wake up in the middle of the night, even for just a moment, I feel my mala. I'm reminded of my Dharma practice. So we're trying now to habituate our mind toward the Dharma. This is why we're doing all that. And there really is a reason why I think that Tibetans do those mantras. So whatever it is in a relative way that you could bring into that, there's many different ways of finding confidence. There's confidence in examining, the cause and effect. There's, when we examine cause and effect, we begin to see how things work, and we begin to make our life work in accordance with those ideas. We need support. We need to support ourselves. But we also have confidence when we have experiences like, the one I told about my mother, that experiences of grace. We have to recall those experiences. We have to develop confidence in those experiences. We have confidence in the compassion that we feel when we serve others, for example. This is a very wholesome mind. We have such capacity to experience grace, is what I'm trying to say. And then when we do these things like mantras, we're learning to associate grace with those simple words and those simple ideas, so we can bring the mantra to our mind at times when we're about to pass, or times when it's scary, and it can soothe us.
That things exist is one extreme, that they do not is the other. Can you finish this thought? Someone's trying to write it down so we can put it in the chat.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that things exist is one extreme, that they do not is another. But I, the Tathagata, give me a minute, that's a long word. But I, the Tathagata, accept neither is nor is not. And I declare the truth from the middle position. The middle position is this completely open mind. We'll talk more about what that means. So that is a very specific meaning. We'll talk about that in the after the break.
You said existence cannot arise from non-existence. So would you say they lean?
Yeah, I guess you could say they lean. Well, non-existence doesn't lean with anything because it's not existence. So what that's trying to say is there is no non-existence here and existence there. There's just all this movement that comes from interdependence. And what we call the world of appearances and possibilities, like who we are, is just this dynamic play of interdependent relationships.
Please share your wisdom and practical advice for being with a friend who this week has had a breakdown in which she has transitioned from being aware and present to going into her own reality with thoughts of taking her own life. She is hospitalized at this time.
Oh, I'm so sorry. That's so hard. I don't know what to do for someone like that, except for just extend love and care, and say a lot of prayers. You know, we're all deluded to some extent because we often don't live in a mind that sees things without impediment. But sometimes I think even from the relative point of view, people kind of withdraw into a really difficult state, and there's a very strong sense of existence to it. So I don't know, I can't really say what to do about that, except to say some prayers or have others say prayers and just extend a lot of love and care. And these things are also, it's temporary, even though people get very stuck in it. That's the thing, is it's all temporary. It's all temporary. Everything that arises is just temporary, and it will change. There's no such thing as being doomed. I think we do feel doomed. Sometimes we feel really dark, or we feel other people are doomed, but I think that that things are, doom comes from seeing things as being very concrete and singular. Like, there's what Trungpa Rinpoche actually said, where you feel things, there's no workability to things, but everything is workable because everything is moving. So there's that. But I mean, these are really hard things. These are really hard things.
Okay, the next question is, if we are fearful of extinction, why isn't extinction all right and possibly part of life that we can accept?
Well, you never know, it may be. And we don't have to accept it because we'll be extinct. Like, if we're extinct, we have nothing to worry about. I don't see all you could understand about death is through your own experience of how the nature of things are, right? So I haven't been able to find anything that arises from nothing. I see everything arises and dissipates from causes and conditions in that way. And so so I have no basis for extinction. Doesn't make sense to me in that way. But I might be wrong, and even the Buddha maybe was wrong. Because I'm thinking more that Buddha's teachings is what has made sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
So, and why do people come into this world with such different predilections? I mean, really different interests, really specific things, like wanting to learn the harpsichord, or I don't know, whatever it is. Like, it could be anything. Everybody is so different, even in the same family. Why is that? Are there no causes and conditions for that? So.
And then there's one comment here. Thank you for sharing so much about Naomi, your mother. Mm-hmm. I especially wanted to say how wonderful your comments about dementia were to me. Mm. One of our nuns at Tashi Chuling had dementia, yet radiated in a way that was so incredibly loving and spacious. Mm. I am so very happy to learn about how Galchen Rinpoche calls Naomi the territory beyond the intellect. Mm-hmm.
That's so nice. Maybe I almost feel like we should end there. See this whole dementia thing, like, we have this idea of what it is, but maybe there's grace in that situation too. And maybe it has to do with the way we see our life and look at the world. And it also has to do with the way we take care of other people. People are taken care of so that they can experience that grace, and we can experience that kind of grace with them. I'm so happy to hear that. And it really has been a fairly consistent experience for me, because my grandmother and other people I have met and seen with dementia have done okay, And I've also seen people who have, people die, and even people, they're not Buddhist practitioners, but the incredible amount of grace in their dying process, So, but we do need to prepare. We also need to prepare. We have an agency. We have agency in our lives. We have this ability this choice to prepare. And that's why this is so strongly encouraged, to do practice and to serve others, and to also logistically take care of how we want to die and how we want to be taken care of. I mean, there's so many elements to all of this. I'm a caregiver, but not officially, so that's probably not what I should talk about. But I do know a lot about dementia now, and I know a lot about. I wanted to talk about existence and non-existence because we have these assumptions so deep in us, and this fear of extinction and this feeling of existence are something that really need to be examined, in us. It's very powerful to really look deeply into that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for these brilliant questions. And I really think that the afternoon might also further deepen and explain. Usually I do this investigation first that I'm going to do in the afternoon because it kind of clears the ground. But I felt like I wanted to talk about my mom and kind of address the dementia piece also as encouragement for everyone, because I think there's so much fear around it. And I've found a lot of magic there. So by this merit, may all obtain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy, wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. And also, I'd like to just add a special kind of sending love and desire to help those who are in the throes of the dying process or have dementia or depression. To please, let's dedicate the merit to those people.